Yeah, recording right now. Cool. What's up, you guys? Welcome to Start Mindsets episode 27. Today we're talking to Whitney Sales. Whitney is currently the partner at Acceleprise, an early stage SaaS based accelerator in San Francisco with offices in New York and now I'm told Toronto. But yeah, Whitney, so glad that you're here and happy to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
It's my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
For sure. If you don't mind, I think a great talking point would be to start off with what is Acceleprise in your explanation and like how do you guys operate and just a little bit detail in there.
Yeah. So Acceleprise is a B2B SaaS accelerator and seed fund. As you mentioned, we have offices in San Francisco, New York, and Toronto. And then we also have a virtual program for people who are outside of those primary locations. We started out, I used to run San Francisco's headquarter location. It was started by my partner, Mike Cardamon, who was, early Box. I want to say he was like 2025, employee 2025 at Box. He and I met when he was running actually his first cohort. And I joined in as the second partner at Acceleprise. At the time, I was like the 37th female GP.
Oh, wow.
And out there, which is sad but true. There's a lot more venture funds these days and a lot more women in the space, which is awesome. We still need to increase the venture funding to women. But as a fund, we primarily focus on the thesis behind what we do actually is that there is a playbook for SaaS, just, kind of three core playbooks that I see for SaaS businesses and it's a repeatable process. And so we specifically focus on accelerating companies and helping teach them that playbook and those best practices and then help them fundraise. So pretty straightforward. We're recently in the process of launching our seed fund. It'll probably be announced by the time this podcast comes out. So that's what
Oh, sweet. Yeah, that's really exciting. I guess something I was curious about. I do know Bite Size, which is one of your portfolio companies, right? Like I made an investment in Bite Size with the venture partners people, and yeah, you guys do a lot of amazing stuff across SaaS, and I think, there's so many accelerators out there. But what do you, I think, in your kind of words, like separates Acceleprise from the rest of the, I guess, accelerators? And maybe if you could talk about that kind of.
Yeah. So first of all of the partners in the fund are operators. So we have built and scaled startups, in my case, many of them. But most of us have started or scaled multiple SaaS companies from the ground up. And so we've been in the shoes of the founders. Second, and when I say we scaled them from the ground up, we've been very early at companies, and so we've seen it and done it ourselves and know it very well. Most people say they've worked early stage companies. They usually join post Series A. I've been employee 6 at companies, employee 20 at companies, employee 11 at companies, and I've built out a number of sales teams, and I've advised startups for.
Gotcha.
For over 8 years. And so we have a lot of experience in building and starting B2B SaaS companies as well. So there's a focus on SaaS and, many experience or a lot of experience specifically in that. So those are the two major things I would say. Some other things we're a pretty diverse fund. So 30% of our companies are founded by female founders. So, and just looking at the overall venture market, it's like 2.3% of all venture capital goes to female founders. Over 70% of our founders are non-white male, which again, pretty astounding number compared to the market.
Yeah.
So, and especially if you look at SaaS, who actually starts SaaS companies, they're in reference, they're even greater. So, those are a couple things I would say. It has to do with culture. We're not looking at the traditional founders. We look for an X factor in founders. It's also why we've had such high success and follow-on funding and things like that for our founders. They're very scrappy, and think outside the box. So I would say those are the primary ones, are, built and developed by operators who've been in your shoes, B2B SaaS focused, incredibly diverse. It doesn't necessarily look at the traditional founder profile.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I guess Whitney, a question for me is, when you started, I guess, or helped start Acceleprise, why make it an accelerator versus, let's say, do a traditional seed fund or even a Series A fund? What was the thesis that you guys were looking at, and you wanted to focus on the earliest of stage actually, versus the later stages?
Yeah. So Acceleprise, so it started by my partner Mike. I joined, I started being a mentor and advising around our second cohort, but I joined when we raised our second fund. So I didn't found Acceleprise. I want to make sure Mike gets the full credit there. The thesis behind it was that SaaS playbook. So back when it was started, one, YC was the major accelerator and tech stars out there. They were generalist funds. They weren't necessarily focused. There were some vertical funds that are starting to come out, but they weren't focused on SaaS. They also haven't traditionally been great. Tech stars has been better, but they haven't traditionally been great with diverse founders, especially female founders. And so there was an opportunity there. There was also, the SaaS component was one on that SaaS playbook. The second thing was, there's a large opportunity in the market. We had a thesis behind the fact that SaaS was going to be growing, which has played out very well. Looking at the market and what's happening in the financial market, it's played out very well. But we saw this coming. And then the other thing had to do with this playbook. So if you remember back in the day, traditional VC advice was to hire a VP of sales, and or build it and they will come.
Yeah.
There's product-led growth is a big trend that's starting to come out in the market. And so, the build it and they will come is starting to come. You still need to sell, and still needs to be a go-to-market component of that where there's a human interaction when it's B2B. But product-led growth is a major trend, which is great. But people are trying to jumpstart that. And for enterprise, which though the price point for fully digital sales is increasing, specifically because of COVID, and the forced adoption around that. Back in the day, people would say hire a VP of sales. If you're a first-time founder and you haven't done the sales yourself, you come from a technical product background, and you hire a VP of sales when you have no idea what skill set you need from your VP of sales, you could potentially run into some major problems. And in reality, most businesses scale to usually around their first million with the founding team, at least $250,000 with the founding team. So that playbook didn't exist as much as it does today. There's a lot of stuff out there, but there is this playbook, and there are best practices around that. And we kept seeing it happen over and over again around this founder-led growth and getting bad advice, and advice that wasn't SaaS B2B focused. And so we wanted to go in and kind of solve that gap or fill that gap.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess companies sort of just start with maybe make an MVP first, right? And then after that, it's does it magically, get adopted, or but when it's an early stage company, it's I guess you would have to do a lot of work, or a lot of effort goes into meeting the right people to sell to, and a lot of trial and error. But I wanted to ask you, since you brought up a lot of startups are created by non-technical engineer, or what I'm trying to say is technical people, right?
Yeah.
Engineers, and maybe they've never been involved with business development or sales before. Do you see I guess within your portfolio and just people in throughout your time as in Acceleprise or in startups in general, do you see there needs to be a major switch that they make, and that they have to learn sales on the job, off the job?
Yeah.
What do you
I
think?
can tell you engineers actually, I was actually just talking to a senior sales leader at the Armory, or Armory. And it was pretty funny. We were talking about it. He was an engineer by background. And if you look at, Mark Roberge from HubSpot, badass in the sales space, he was an engineer by training. Engineers actually make phenomenal salespeople because they're very processes and systems oriented. And to optimize something, you have to have a process behind it in order to change the pieces of it. The big challenge is people see sales as an art, and there is an art to it to a certain extent. There's an art of listening to your customer in the same way you put on your product hat. You need to put on your sales hat, right? There was a talk with the CEO of Databricks and the A16Z team that just came out, and the CEO of Databricks was talking about interviewing a VP of sales, and they were talking about, what do you think of X model, and the guy's like, if it goes up, great. And he's an engineer by background, and he's like, okay, what if it goes down? He's like, not so great. And it was just like, it was such a salesperson's answer. He's like, what do you think about it? And he found this way to like turn the question around on them. And there's this mentality from a sales perspective where you need to get the customer to tell you the answer. And that has to do with asking the right questions. One of the founding teams I work with recently called it leading the witness. That's essentially what you're doing, is you're framing the problem in the customer's mind and how you present the problem through your founding story, and then asking the right questions to get the customer to think about the problem in the way they need to be thinking about it, to challenge their mindset around it before you introduce the solution. And that is a little bit of an art. But once you understand that and you can kind of tweak it and go, once you kind of create your script, it's not any different than the architecture around, the figuring out your go-to-market is not any different than figuring out the architecture around your code base and your product. Certain things have different levers, and there's certain things that drive certain problems. And so if you understand the framework behind it, you can identify where those problems sit and then diagnose them. But the biggest challenge I find when I'm coming into founders is they don't see it like a framework. They don't put it together as a process and really like work it through.
I'd love to like get your sense on like, how does product market fit come into play once, like maybe a startup has like 5 customers? Like, how do you think?
Every startup's always working on product market fit.
Okay.
Like when is product market fit ever defined? Because in reality, you start on a core segment, you start on a beachhead market, then you have to figure out your larger market you're going after. You have to figure out how the product fits within that market. Maybe you're scaling up market, maybe you're scaling across market. So, I mean, in reality, like there's this, this golden magical land of product market fit. Like, yeah, you need to be able to sell your product, and it needs to be a repeatable product that you sell. And the sales process needs to be repeatable, and you can't be developing a different product for every single customer. It needs to be a scalable product that customers want to buy. But in reality, like the definition of product market fit is basically in your ability to sell it to a VC around having product market fit. Like it's this like wonderful land of bullshit that so many people talk about. But in reality, do you have a repeatable sales process? How much have you de-risked around that? And are they buying the same product? Or are you, changing it every single time with every customer? And when you stop having to change it every single time for every customer, you probably are getting close to product market fit. And when, as you expand into, and you can sell it repeatedly and there's the same process over and over again, like you've got a repeatable sales process, you have a scalable product, and then it's about figuring out like, how do you expand your market? And maybe you have to tweak the product a little bit around that.
Right.
But sorry about that.
Yeah. I guess, Whitney, one thing that I was, super grateful to meet you, because you were one of the first people that said like, you know what, sales is something that I am very good at, right? And I was like, oh, wow, that's really interesting, because most people are scared of it. Most people like think that it's a dirty word. Tell us more about like, how a founder or just generally people, make sure that they're not scared about selling, right? Because that's something, I think it's a mental block for most people, especially founders.
Yeah. So there are definitely things I can improve on selling. So I'll just say that I love selling. So that's part of it for me. And there's definitely areas of selling that I'm not particularly good at. I'm not super technical. So, developer tools, I'm not as great at, selling to hospitals, I'm not particularly great at. Those are two different sales processes. If you're selling to fully technical people, but, otherwise it's, there's a lot of things about it that are pretty similar. And then it's just figuring out the language, of that industry and those buyers. But coming back to why not to be afraid of selling, you are selling people all the time. Like when you're trying to convince someone of something, you're selling them. You're, exchanging credibility for an idea. You're exchanging time, like sales in reality is just an exchange of, value for money. Like whatever concept of value is in your customer's head, like, and equating that for dollars. That's the only major difference. And I break sales down into two things. It's problem solving and project management. Those two things are actually pretty easy to do in people's minds, when you frame it that way. But most people think of this concept of a used car salesman or, like the boiler room of salespeople. And yeah, it's a different person. It is a different personality. Like if you're an engineer and you bring in your salespeople, there are very different cultures between engineering teams and sales teams. They are. Salespeople are loud.
Yeah.
They're very competitive. They're very like rewards based. They're a little bit more short-term than long-term mentality. Like, they have no shame, and I especially have no shame about asking for things that I want. I'm very direct. Like I'm going to push my agenda in most meetings. I'm pretty loud, those kind of things. But in reality, it's just a culture difference. That doesn't mean you're not going to be good at it. And it doesn't mean everyone has, one of the things I teach founders a lot is every person has their own style of selling. Like your style is not necessarily going to be the other person's style. And so part of being a good manager is learning what that person's style is and helping them kind of like adapt it for them. And so that's why I like processes and mental models around selling as opposed to scripts and things like that, because the way I say something is not going to resonate with someone as the way you say something. And how you convince someone of something is very different from how I convince someone of something. And so you kind of have to help people develop their own style of selling.
Yeah. I think, kind of like sales is like, I mean, underneath the umbrella of sales, there's like the cold calling one, and then there's like warm leads, and like it's kind of like, I mean, there's definitely a different mindset, right? When you're cold calling, and do you see that most early stage startups are doing cold calling since, I mean, that you could try to just experiment?
I can tell you, cold calling does work depending on the industry, because it depends on their channel, like how they learn about new products and whether they answer their phone, right? But it does actually work. And I can tell you it was taught in the entrepreneurial sales class at Harvard this past fall, because I was a sales coach for it. It's Mark Roberge's class that he teaches at Harvard, and the MBA program. So I can tell you it's actually still taught. And I like, yeah, it's kind of a turnoff, but in reality, it's just picking up the phone and like talking to someone. Like, people tie a lot of emotions around particular behavior, but it's just a mental blocker and an emotional blocker. And if you can get past it, you can get past it. Like, you have no problem reaching out to people to do customer discovery interviews and like cold reaching out to people and asking for introductions. So what's the difference in asking them for like a qualifying conversation or like a discovery conversation to learn about how they're doing things? It's not any different.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And the most successful, like you kind of just, as if you're a founder, you can't have shame because the products, this is one thing I tell people all the time. Your product is never going to be good enough. The customer is always going to want more. They are always going to want to pay less. Like, it's just the way it is. And it's your job to hold the value of your product and like have no shame about it. Like, be proud of what you put out, even if you think it can be better, because it can always be better. You're going to always think it can be better. Your salespeople are always going to think it can be better. Your engineers are always going to think it's going to be better. And your customer's always going to want it to be better. Like, you kind of just have to get past it and get over it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you think that, I mean, do you think that emotions get in the way? I mean, like, for example, I'm sure a lot of sales, they don't happen, right? Like, and there's like, maybe you'll do 100 conversations, only 20 will sell, right? Is that kind of common? And like, maybe the founder, or like the SDR, or like anyone on the sales team, does that discourage them? Or like, what do you think there? And like,
One of my first managers I used to sell into the real estate industry. It was my first job out of college. And let me tell you, commercial real estate brokers are painful to sell to. They are aggressive, especially when you have the East Coast as your territory. They talk fast, they want you to pitch, and they're rude. Um, and I used to get them hanging up on me all the time. I used to get them to tell me like expletives all the time, like tell me to go fuck off. Like they were rude. And one of my first bosses, who was also a New Yorker, um, really bad, but he told me, he's like, if you have someone rude, just hang up the phone and say what you want to say, what you wish you said to them. And you hear people swearing when they got off the phone, including myself. And he's like, just do it, let it out and be done with it. Don't take it personally. It has nothing to do with you. Like in reality, if someone's rude, it has nothing to do with you. Like
Sure.
Even when people get mad at you, and a lot of times it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with like how their day went. If they're hungry, if they haven't had a bio break, like if they've been on 5 hours of Zoom calls and don't want to talk to anyone, like it likely has nothing to do with you. So you taking it personally it's like taking more power than you need to make yourself feel bad.
Yeah.
Like it's not a smart thing to do. And it's just a general motto for life. Like roll with it, like just let it go and move on. And I don't have to do that anymore. If someone's rude to me, it's just kind of like, whatever. They had a bad day, empathy for them. Okay, I'm going to move on. And in reality, anytime rejection is information, that's all it is. It's just information. Like maybe you took the wrong approach. Maybe not the right person at the company to talk to. Like that's all it is. No is just information. Rejection is just information. That's all it is. So don't take it personally.
I love that, Whitney. I think a lot of us think of rejection and take it extremely personally, right? Especially it's the product that you're building, and you think that they're kind of, you know, pissing on your baby, right?
Yeah.
So that's always people are always worried about. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about like you and and really this section, would like to understand, how did you how did you get into an entrepreneurial mindset? I mean, any point, I guess, in your life that you realize that you really like building companies, selling new products, because this is a path where most people don't really discover, right? So
Yeah.
maybe if you can tell us more about like a certain point in your life where you kind of maybe discovered this for yourself.
Yeah. So I was the little kid who sold Girl Scout cookies and would sell cookies, like homemade cookies and lemonade stand and friendship bracelets and flowers I cut from my neighbor's garden and turned into potpourri. Like I would figure out ways as a kid to make money. And I worked 3 jobs through high school, graduated early, a semester early, and took college courses from my junior year on. Graduated from college in 4 years, but I had finished a year of school before I actually went to college. I just didn't want to finish college too early. But college years are fun. But how, like, so I guess I had a little bit of it for a while. I think the sales mindset I had to do with the fact, I'm dyslexic. And so when I was younger, I was bullied a bit. I used to have this big gap in between my front teeth. So I'd actually whistle when I spoke through my front teeth. Like I was a cute little kid, but like not so cute when you can't read and you whistle when you speak. So I was teased pretty badly, and I had to go to special ed classes. I was top like 2% in math and like bottom 20 in English. It was really bad. And so I had to learn to ask for help a lot. And I was really lucky. I had, special, like the woman who taught our, special ed program. I'm not sure the politically correct term for it now, but like who taught that program in our school, her daughter was dyslexic. And so she actually specialized in dyslexia. And so, interesting fact, 30% of entrepreneurs are actually dyslexic. And I think it has to do with the fact that you just learn that the way things work doesn't work for you. Like you have to do things your own way. And so I think it has a little bit to do with those two things. So like needing to ask for help constantly because I just couldn't do a lot of things. And I was challenged by like everyday activities. Learning that systems didn't work for me and learning how to learn, learn my own way, which was great. Cause once I learned my own way, I like accelerated. And it didn't take me nearly as much work as a lot of people in college to get the information I needed. And I was shameless about asking for help. So those kind of things happened. And then when I worked at a law firm in college, their business grew significantly while I was there. And I didn't think I was going to go into sales. It's not like something you aspire to be. I had planned on being a lawyer. Oh, sorry, Dan, you're on mute.
Oh,
yeah, you're good now.
Your last name, is it Sales or is that like a nickname?
Yeah, it's Sales Kincannon. Actually, I dropped Kincannon when I was like 8 because dyslexia. Everyone knew how to spell sales. No one knew how to spell Kincannon, and writing out a 15-letter last name is torture for a dyslexic child who writes like backwards and upside down and all that kind of stuff. So I just, I dropped it because it was easier for me. My little kid brain just figured I'd take the last name that everyone knew how to spell. So my driver's license does say Sales Kincannon, but I've gone by Whitney Sales for long time. And so anyway, I worked for a law firm. The business grew significantly. I decided I didn't want to go into law, and the lawyer I worked for, I asked him what I should do, and he's like, "You should try sales. It pays really well. I think you'd be really good at it. Our business has grown having you. Like, you're a people person. Give it a shot." And so out of college, I went and interviewed for a bunch of startups, and I got an offer at every job I interviewed for, and picked a startup and fell in love with it. And I launched my first product there.
For sure. How long did it take you to figure out that you were good at sales or that you liked it?
I hit 300% of quota within my first month, and my first, and it was a ramp quota, but I basically hit the quota that everyone else had full in my first month over that quota, and continued to hit over quota for 18 months. And so I was pretty good at it.
Yeah. Does that just come from being tenacious and just having that I can attitude and just believing that the people that you're talking to should be your customer at the end of the day? Is that really what it boils down to?
I think part of it had to do with I had a pretty big chip on my shoulder in my 20s.
Oh.
So I was not going to lose, and I was never going to let anyone down. I'm also incredibly creative, and so I could come up with which serves me very well in the in my current role, but I'm working with startups, but on go-to-market, but I was incredibly creative, so I could come up with different ways to position things and different ways to do things, but I'm also analytical and process-oriented, so I'd figure out ways to rework systems or make it better. And then I was ambitious. So, when they offered education credits, I took education credits. I took a negotiation course. I made friends with my professor. He came in and taught at all the startups that I worked at after that.
Okay.
It was tenacious. I also had a chip on my shoulder and I wasn't going to lose. That's been removed by a prior boss because it was not going to work in a lot of cultures, but it was, I was not going to lose. I was going to be, the best.
Yeah. Do you think that DNA of what's it called? Type A personality maybe, or just, maybe.
I am definitely not type A, actually.
I don't even know what I am anymore.
Yeah, I am a creative at heart. So I wouldn't what makes someone good at sales is a little one, you have to be coachable. 2, you have to be able to pick up on patterns and learn from people very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have good communication skills, great communication skills, strong writing skills. Like I was a sociology major. I called it the major of bullshit because like your job was to basically like identify some social pattern and like come up with like how it was a pattern. It was all theoretical. Still love sociology. There's a lot of really great things about soc. But like papers I had to write were all theoretical and it was all like BS. And so it trained me really well for selling in written communication and like arguing a point in written communication. So I don't know. I wouldn't say it's like type A, but I would say being tenacious, like not like being able to move past like social barriers and like people who have had to overcome some type of social adversity in general, because you know you can't really have a lot of shame in sales and you have to have kind of a personality, you know, to talk to people and you know get to know people and like break down the social barrier. So you know, like the popular kid isn't necessarily always going to be the best salesperson sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and then a competitive mindset. I was competitive when I was younger. I would say I'm less so now. I kind of set my own bar now. But when I was younger, like I judge myself by other people's bars versus my own.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think that it's also like a must that the salesperson should be like high energy? Is that because that's what I kind of like can infer, and like kind of the people who I'm friends with in sales, like
I mean,
reviews, I
um,
like that. Do you think
one of the, sorry, you're cutting in and out, so I don't know if I'm cutting in and out.
yeah, I was just saying, do you think it's a must that to be a salesperson you need to be like high energy and like in every conversation bring a lot of like, you know, that it like that that thing that I guess.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily that you need to be high energy, but like I'm not an extrovert. I'm actually an introvert. I love people, but I'm more of an ambivert. Let's say that.
Bert, probably.
Yeah. I can definitely get energized by people, but it's usually like specific types of people. So what I was going to say is that I wouldn't necessarily say it's high energy, but you need to have a high EQ and a high level of empathy. And if someone is low energy when you're interacting with them, you need to be able to match that rapport and then bring them up.
Sure.
So you do need to know how to like get your energy up and down while mirroring the person to build that kind of that bridge and that rapport with someone. So I wouldn't say you have to be high energy, but you have to have a high EQ and a high level, you know, empathy to be able to build that bridge from an emotional state and build a positive emotional state in someone else, because that is kind of what you're trying to do when you're selling. There's a feeling that comes along with selling someone, as well as an intellectual logic that comes along with it. So you need to have the ability to kind of manage both of those.
Right.
Yeah, Whitney, in your story, kind of after college, you said that you applied to a number of startups. There's a lot of listeners here that are looking for career transitions and trying to go from, let's say, college to maybe a startup, or even from a large company to a startup. How do you make that mental transition? Just because it's a very hard one, especially that large corporate, and then I want to do a startup, right?
Yeah. So I knew I always wanted to work for a startup. I never wanted to work for a big company. I am not a cog in a wheel. I like to learn and I move very fast. And as soon as things become repetitive, I get bored. So, and I move on. So, I knew that about myself from the beginning. So I knew I wanted to work for a startup. If you're someone who's at a corporate who wants to work for a startup, the first thing I say is start working with founders. Like it's pretty easy to plug into the founder ecosystem. They all need help. They all need advice. They all want to pick your brain. So the first thing you should do is just get to know founders out there and like get to know the different types of founders that exist, so you can figure out the type of startup you want to go into, like plug into the startup ecosystem and understand it. Before making the leap. Like don't just make a leap because you're probably going to get in over your head because it's trial by fire versus nice cushy paycheck. There's a big transition in that, and you have to do everything yourself versus everything being available to you, depending on the size of corporate, because you get into big enough corporates and nothing's done for you. It's like they scale themselves out of helping people. But anyway, making that transition, it depends on whether you're a tactical executor or a strategic executor. So meaning leadership or, someone on the tactical team. Like if you want to make a transition from like an enterprise org to a sales org, to a startup sales org. The things I would look for if you're a tactical executor is looking at companies that have a similar model to the organization that you are at. So if you're an enterprise enterprise salesperson, look for an enterprise sale. If you're, look at the types of buyers they are. So is there overlap in the existing customer base and the type of customer you used to sell into, so you can bring some knowledge in there, because ideally the startup is also hiring for that knowledge. Now, if you're a leader who's transitioning, I would definitely recommend advising the company for at least 3 months. Do no equity, like don't ask for that, because more than likely they're going to want a cliff, and you're not going to want to buy the equity if it doesn't work out after 3 months anyway. So, like say, hey, I'm interested in like your organization and learning more about you. I would love to work with you for a few months, like an advisor capacity, and see if it's something you want to join. Like a lot of founders will be interviewing for a specific role. If you give them the option to try it out, so you guys can find a mutual fit, both of you are going to be in a much better position, because you know what you're getting yourself into by the time you sign up for full time. And if you're in a leadership position, you usually have enough money to be able to do something for a few months. And the startup can pay you something for those 3 months if you're coming on an advisory capacity, to figure out if it's going to work before you hire someone.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's super helpful. Just one or two more things here. I just want to ask, like, do you have a cool story from maybe one of the portfolio companies and how they approach sales, and like, I mean, maybe something unexpected, or like, I don't know, they did something really unique that, I don't know, it's worth hearing, or like something you could share from there?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you ask about that. I have so many of them, but it's really hard for me to pull the individual story unless I talk to that person that day. What are some things that have been done? I mean, one of my companies just has built a massive marketplace of customers that they can just pull from, by being a top Google search result, around really small nuanced things for demand gen. Another company I work with did a hack on Twitter where they didn't hack Twitter. They did an ad on Twitter that we actually had a 50% conversion rate from ad to qualifying meeting. And then that was like another, like, I think 30% of those would convert. So it was actually pretty high conversion rate, because they were super targeted on their Twitter ads. Twitter changed its algorithm, and then they moved over to Quora. Quora does not have a cap on outbidding people. And if you have a high contract value, you can do that. Like you can, they say it's against the terms, but until they build it in there, it's not really against the terms for startups.
Okay.
Do what you can these days. So that was another one. You can just always outbid. What are some other things? Like I've heard of some other ones, like companies have gone after like YouTubers, like people who follow people on YouTube. This is more of a B2C type company. It's interesting. I'm like trying to think through these. It's like literally, if I didn't hear it in the past week, I have the worst long-term memory. Yeah, those are some I can think of off the top of my head, but I mean, it's changing a lot these days. It is really changing, like especially around the product-led growth component.
Yeah.
And how people acquire customers.
Just piggybacking off of that question, how has like the lockdown and quarantine in place kind of affected sales? Like maybe does sales take a hit because not everyone's in the office and like there's not a vibe because people work from home, or like, I don't know, like, is it you have to approach these potential customers in a unique way since?
I would say, like, okay, so for enterprise deals, it's forced people to go online, and like not being able to meet people at conferences is pretty hard.
Uh-huh.
Certain markets, because they're the majority of like what they acquire, or the majority of their demand generation is done at conferences. So they've had to figure things out, but it's also forced a lot of people who never used to have a big online presence online, which is pretty cool. So price points have gone up. like, or not price points, but the price point in which people buy fully virtual has gone way up, which is great. I think that's awesome. Like it's forced a lot of people online, so it's changed their online behavior. Traditional marketing channels have changed quite a bit. So like email marketing is way up, so you have to find other ways to get in touch with your buyer. So Slack channels are great. You know, Twitter's, like, people's activity on Twitter has gone way up. They have their, you know, you can DM people there. You know, there's a lot of different, like, the channel expansion. Everyone has podcasts these days, no offense, guys. But like, everyone's doing a podcast. There's Clubhouse that's changed. Like, people are doing a lot of self-promotion on Clubhouse. So I would say the channel development has changed quite a bit. Like, how people go to market has changed quite a bit. And then the sales process overall, I don't think has changed that much. I mean, you can't, like, meet people face to face, so building trust takes a little bit longer, but you can do that through proof of concept, which is this whole thing around leading from a product-led growth capacity, which is driving a lot of sales that way.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Whitney, maybe we could kind of wrap up this podcast with our 3 questions. But
Yeah.
the first question is, you know, if you had to summarize your own personal startup mindset in 1 to 2 sentences, what would that be?
Don't be afraid, just try it. Like, just go for it. Like, especially the earlier the better. There's so many things. When I was younger, I had this, like, mentality of, like, putting in my dues. You don't need to put in your dues, just go for it. Like,
I love that.
you have a lot less to lose the younger you are.
I love that. Yeah, because it's always, people always think that, yeah, how do I deserve it, right? What, you know, how do I pay my dues? So that's an amazing advice. Second question for me before I turn it over to Dan for the final questions. You know, if you had to meet, I guess, Whitney, a 20-year-old Whitney right now,
Yeah.
what would you advise to her for her to discover, you know, her very own startup mindset, and, you know, to make sure that they follow or maybe not follow the path that you're in right now?
I mean, for me, it's, I have, like I said, I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder when I was younger. So I would say that you have nothing to prove. There was a lot of trying to prove I was smart enough, prove my own value. I think part of it had to do with my dyslexic mindset, like being dyslexic and teased when I was younger. Even though I did really well in college and, like, graduated with honors and all that stuff. But there was a lot of, like, needing to prove myself in life that I've thrown that completely out the window. I have nothing to prove anymore. It's like, you know, I just enjoy life, enjoy my friends, enjoy the people I work with. So just like you have nothing to prove, and enjoy, like, find the things you enjoy, I guess, would probably be the advice I give.
That's super amazing advice. Yeah. I think the final thing I tend to ask here is, how can people find you, or, you know, follow your work? And I see you're at The Sales Method on Twitter. So
Yeah. So yeah, it's at The Sales Method. I'm Whitney at The Sales Method. I'm Whitney at Acceleprise.vc. So it's pretty easy to get in touch with me. You can add me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty open. Just, like, reference this podcast. You heard me on the podcast and want to connect. I am not a person who's, like, super restrictive. I am restrictive with my time. It was great to see you again, Earl. But I'm restrictive with my time, but I'm not super restrictive about, you know, people reaching out and trying to connect, or, you know, like, if they have a question, I probably have a deck or a piece of content on it I've developed. It may not be published, but I probably have something in my Google Drive or my Notion page. So I probably have something I can recommend. And I'm very big on making things accessible. If you couldn't tell, it's like, get rid of the mental bullshit and, like, just do it and figure it out. And I am happy to share. I'm very, very open.
for sure. Well, you guys heard it here first. The Sales Method with Whitney Sales. Totally I guess, like, maybe you might be, like, up there with, like, the best sales connoisseur that I've, like, kind of spoken to. I kind of learned a lot here. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad it's been helpful.
Thanks.